coffee on his lap, cigarettes curling, smoking his political trap. Michael Vast roars through the screen, he flies, painting red and blue skies with his fiery cry. He's the world's watchdog, calling out the bluff. Right-wing swagger, but his heart's pretty tough. He's a Republican dragon with his truthful slight, fights the battles unseen in the shadows of the night. From policy to passion, he breaks it all down, giving a voice to the voiceless, wearing his crown. Caffeine-fueled mornings, the smoke curls dance, fluffy at his feet, giving life one more chance. Through algorithms and bias, he cuts straight and clear. Michael's roar echoes in the hemisphere. Michael Vast roars through the screen, he flies, painting red and blue skies with his fiery cry. He's the world's watchdog, calling out the bluff. Right-wing swagger, but his heart's pretty tough. No sound bites allowed is his ultimate creed. A dragon's perspective where facts are the seed. Standing tall on his battlefield of thoughts, guarding the truth that others forgot. Michael Vast roars through the screen, he flies, painting red and blue skies with his fiery cry. He's the world's watchdog, calling out the bluff. Right-wing swagger, but his heart's pretty tough.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in our offices in the Bronx, New York. Today is August 23rd. It's the middle of the day. I believe I'm taping this around 2:30 in the afternoon. And the reason why I wanted to do this, I promised last week that as soon as my computer was fixed, I would go back and talk about a video, an interview with former President Barack Obama. And I want to be a man of my word. I want to go back over that. Now, that was last week, Thursday. A lot has happened since that time. And I want to put that all into context because it's not just a deep dive on Barack Obama and some of the things that he said. I want to do a deep dive on what we see coming from the left, the messaging of the left from last week through till today, because I think it really tells us about what's happening in America, the political divide, the reason why it's so difficult to end this cycle of violence. And it is a cycle of violence that we are going through right now. It's horrific what we're seeing happening. And we need to talk about this because we not only need to talk about it, we need to recognize what is happening. We have a lot of spin coming from the left and some as well from the right. We have spin that's out there that's telling us, don't believe your lying eyes and everything's fine, or it's just the conservatives, it's just the Republicans, it's just the leftists. Well, it is kind of the leftists, and we really should be paying attention to them because, and that's in the right, is very law-abiding and law and order. And that's why we don't see autonomous zones. We don't see rioting. We don't see looting every time that, in fact, we don't really even see protests from the right. We do see that from the left. It is, and on the left, we have seen an indoctrination, a culture that justifies violence against any thought that is not their own. Now, I know there's a bunch of people who are watching and they're leftist, and they're going to say to me, but Mike, you don't understand, and I'm not going to listen. Because the left loves to dismiss. They like to say, well, you're not an expert, as if you need to be an expert to see what's going on. They say, well, I'm not going to listen to you because you're an ist and a phobe, and they'll pick whatever their favorite ist, their favorite phobe, and they'll label you with that. And that's supposed to mean now be silent, comply. And the answer is no, because the problem is that you're indoctrinated to the point that any label makes you say, I don't have to listen anymore. I don't need to participate. And that if you continue to speak, well, that's a microaggression. You've hurt my feeling, and therefore I can have violence against you. And thus we get Charlie Kirk. So I want to address that. And I want to address that in somewhat of a deep dive to explain why people on the right see this for people on the left who don't get it or justify it, so we can stop this, so that we can stop this from getting worse, because we are on track for another assault, another assassination, another murder like Charlie Kirk. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that against anyone. Now, before I go further, I will say there are threats right now against those on the left as well as on the right. Far fewer, and usually not as severe, but there are insane individuals out there on the right as well as the left that are saying, oh, well, I want to do some act of violence. I want retribution. I want to lash out against my political enemies, whether they're real or perceived. It doesn't matter. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. But if we're being honest, the overwhelming predominance of this ideology that if you offend me, that's a microaggression. A microaggression means violence, and therefore I can use violence against you. That is a leftist indoctrination we have been hearing in colleges for a decade now. And let's be honest about it. So let me go back and let's take a look at this step by step, okay? So let's start with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, as we know, was in Utah at the Utah Valley University. He was doing a Change My Mind style event. He was answering the questions of those who disagreed with him. And the individual on screen decided to kill him. And as we have seen and learned from both evidence and eyewitnesses, this individual, and supposedly a confession on Discord, this individual assassinated Charlie Kirk. And depending on which news media source you look at, especially all of them on the left, are trying to be very sympathetic towards this assassin. And they're trying to justify and leave loopholes in evidence that we have all heard and seen at this point that make it very clear that this was a leftist indoctrination of this young man. He's not a kid. Young man who has his lifestyle is left-leaning, and his messages left behind are left-leaning and show a left-leaning motivation. Even though the left wants to say, no, it's not clear, it's not sure. It is clear and it is sure. The very first thing the left said to try and distance themselves from this man, this young man, this madman, was, oh, well, this was, Matthew Dowd said, it was a celebration. One of the MAGA supporters fired a rifle in celebration and accidentally killed Charlie Kirk. We know that was a lie. That was completely fictional, made up. It was a fantasy in Matthew Dowd's head, and he got fired for it, as he should. And his further comments thereafter, where he justified the shooting. And he got fired, as he should, and he should not be rehired. And we found out that wasn't true. Then the story came out, well, this kid is MAGA because his family are conservatives. They voted for Donald Trump. Now, what his family has to do with his own actions, I don't understand. And as we learned, his family's motivations to vote for Donald Trump, to be conservative, had nothing to do with the killer's personal viewpoints. He's completely different than them. And he didn't share their opinions. So no matter what his family is or is not, the killer is separate of them. So that story fell apart. Then we see the story come out with Jimmy Kimmel, who's also pushing the message, well, this is a MAGA kid. And at the time he said that, the killer had been captured. We had data from his roommate, eyewitness testimony from his roommate and his family. We had messages, text messages. We had Discord messages. We had the bullets and the rifle with messages that told us very explicitly this kid was not MAGA. He's not right-leaning. He didn't vote for Donald Trump. In fact, he hated Donald Trump. He didn't agree with the conservative viewpoints, and very likely it appeared that he wasn't religious. So, no, that was a point-blank lie that Jimmy Kimmel told the American people. And Jimmy Kimmel, as a consequence of that, was punished by not the news media, not the FCC, which, by the way, Jimmy Kimmel did commit a crime. Jimmy Kimmel is on public airwaves. It is a crime for a news media personality, which Jimmy Kimmel is, to say something that is factually incorrect, knowingly factually incorrect, a lie to the American public, especially if that lie will influence those American citizens watching him. That is a crime. That is illegal. Now, the FCC had all the right that if it received complaints, they could then investigate and then follow up with charges if it was found, and it was already obvious to everyone, that Jimmy Kimmel broke the rules and laws on public news and public channels. And that would be ABC, Disney. But without that, the affiliates of ABC, the channels across this nation that rebroadcast ABC News and ABC programming, Disney programming across this country, said Jimmy Kimmel was insensitive at the least and incendiary at the worst and absolutely disrespectful throughout. And therefore, they would not show ABC News. They would not carry that program. They were going to put anything and everything else on, and they wound up putting on game shows, which did as well, if not better, than Jimmy Kimmel's normal show. ABC, Disney, looking at the loss of their affiliates and the potential loss of advertisers along with that, spoke to Jimmy Kimmel, as we now know. And we know, as a result of that, Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off the air. And just to refresh everyone's memory, here is what Jimmy Kimmel said. And I want to be very clear. He knew at the time that this was recorded on Monday afternoon, if not evening, he already knew, like the rest of us, that there were texts, there were Discord messages, there were eyewitness testimony, and there were etchings on bullets that all indicated the motivation of this killer. He was not right-wing. He was left-wing. He was indoctrinated. And he was angry at anyone who didn't share his ideology, in particular, Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk. So let's see what he had to say.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as
not a kid. Again, he's a 22-year-old young man. That's not a kid. 16, that's a kid. He's 22. He's a man. Young man, if you want. But he's grown in every sense of the word. So already we see that Kimmel has made up his mind to try and incite sympathy in the audience, to try and get them to feel bad because this child made a mistake. That's why he's trying to imply. That's why he said kid. But that's not accurate. So already Jimmy Kimmel is being insensitive and inaccurate. But let's go further.
is anything other than one of them and doing everything.
One of them. The kid is is anything but one of them. Well, the evidence says he's not right-wing. The evidence says he doesn't like Donald Trump or the Trump administration. The evidence said, and the eyewitnesses said, he had a vendetta against Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk. So the evidence said this, not the right wing, the evidence from the killer himself. This is the point where Jimmy Kimmel has gone from being just insensitive and rude and boorish to being a liar. And this is where the crime comes in, according to the FCC. He's knowingly saying something that was openly and immediately available to the public, and he lied. He has lied because that's not what was happening. The evidence does not support what he says. He is lying to the American public. This isn't a joke, by the way. He is now recounting facts based on his fantasy against the right and conservatives and half of America. He's recounting a fantasy as if it were fact, and that is not a joke, not a black joke, not a dark humor joke. It's not a joke at all. This is fact. He's just recounting fact. Let's go on.
Everything they can to score political points from.
Here's everything they can to score political points. The only one trying to score political points at that point on Monday was Jimmy Kimmel and the left. They had already gone through 3 different versions of the news story by the time Jimmy Kimmel was responding on Monday, last week, Monday, about that. 3 different versions, all on the left. The story from the right and from conservatives and from independents had not changed because the story was based on the evidence. Only the left were changing the story, trying to find ways to draw sympathy or justification or misidentification, anything to keep their ideology protected, to keep their elected officials protected. That's who changed. The right didn't change. The center, the independents, didn't change. The evidence didn't change. So Jimmy Kimmel is factually incorrect, and therefore the FCC had every right, if anyone complained, and many individual people were complaining, and the affiliates were complaining. So the FCC had and does have every right to investigate this. And based on what he just said, that's a violation of the FCC regulations. Therefore, he can be fined. ABC can be fined. And then whatever happens after that. So I just wanted to be very clear that this isn't something that was made up by the right. That isn't something, those are his words. And that is how his words impacted the right, the center, the left, America. And the motivation for that, as we can determine from the news media, from the multiple stories, from the evidence, from Jimmy Kimmel's own words. As Jimmy Kimmel was fired, well, temporarily, he was suspended. And we saw that the left then took the opportunity to change the story. It was no longer about Jimmy Kimmel. It was now about, they changed the story. It was no longer about Charlie Kirk or the leftist indoctrination that motivated him. No, now the story became, it's the First Amendment, but the First Amendment applied only to Jimmy Kimmel, not the First Amendment that was removed from Charlie Kirk along with his life, and a message sent to everyone on the right and the center, anyone who was not speaking the approved messaging of the left. No, we're talking about the First Amendment rights of Jimmy Kimmel. Mind you, Jimmy Kimmel could get another job. Jimmy Kimmel is a multimillionaire. Jimmy Kimmel is still alive, but Charlie Kirk isn't. Now, separate of that, the left then rallied around this idea that, well, it's the right, the Trump administration, MAGA, were unfairly attacking Jimmy Kimmel. Again, I've explained why it was fair, but that was the message coming from the left. And they dogpiled onto that story so they didn't have to talk about the actual core of the story, which is the attack by those who are indoctrinated against those who are on the right. And they changed the story and said, it was Stephen Colbert who said, we are all Jimmy Kimmel. Well, the week before, he didn't say, we are all Charlie Kirk. And I think he should have. If he's truly about the free speech and he's truly about the equality and that his message isn't just partisan, then Stephen Colbert last week, at the time that Charlie Kirk was killed or immediately afterwards, should have been saying, we are all Charlie Kirk, because we are American citizens who are not elected. Many of us are fathers and or married and or just men or women, human beings living our life, and we have an opinion, which is protected by the First Amendment, and we can share that opinion on whatever platform we want. We are Charlie Kirk. We are not Jimmy Kimmel. The overwhelming 99.9999% of Americans are not multimillionaires worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million. We are not on nightly news, national audiences around the world. We are not working for Disney. We do not have a staff of dozens of individuals working around us. We are not elite Hollywood personalities. It's just not who we are. We are not Jimmy Kimmel in any way, shape, or form, but we are Charlie Kirk. Whether you're a small business owner, a family man, just an American who wants to share their point of view. So as they were pushing that message, they brought out the big guns, Barack Obama. And I had a problem with that because Barack Obama justified the murder of Charlie Kirk, blamed it on Orange Man Bad, on Donald Trump, and twisted the whole story and tried to support and justify Jimmy Kimmel was really the center of the story, not Charlie Kirk. And the bad guy for both Charlie Kirk and for what happened to Jimmy Kimmel was in fact Donald Trump, Orange Man Bad. And this is a former president stepping into this very public issue and being very hyper partisan about it. And we will go into great detail. I did a small clip on part of what he said. I will go through the entire thing a little bit later. So that kind of sets the tone of where the nation is. After multiple stories, multiple versions of stories, after multiple ways of trying to diminish the original story, the core of the story, which deals with the First Amendment, Charlie Kirk, his assassination, a mindset on the left that only exists on left. Now it's become about Jimmy Kimmel. It's become about free speech. It's become about Orange Man Bad somehow. But that wasn't the only messaging that was going on at that time. In the last week, we've also had people like this. This is Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. And she's also adding to the flames, adding to the disruption in America. I mean, one of the biggest, you look at any poll by any organization anywhere in America, and in the top 5 issues that Americans want resolved, that they're worried about, that we have concerns about at this time, is crime. And that increased over the last 4 years and has been somewhat diminished since January of 2025, but it is still a top concern, especially if you live in any of the major cities like New York, LA, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit. We can keep going through the cities. You know this to be a fact. So, given that concern of the American people in city after city, state after state, across this nation, knowing that the idea of social justice and criminal justice reform has failed, that experiment over the last 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration failed empirically. The data proves it failed. Repeat offense after repeat offense. We had individuals like the Charlottesville murderer, the guy who stood up and stabbed a woman 22 times in the neck, walking away saying, I killed that white woman. Yeah, he was arrested 14 times, served 5 years in jail. And the judges kept letting him out into the public, not getting him the mental health he needed, or keeping him incarcerated as he very likely should have been. And this is the mindset of the left, because there is no crime, period. And I don't mean that facetiously. This is Jasmine Crockett, a sitting member of Congress. And this is her saying.
And so I do want people to know that just because someone has committed a crime, it doesn't make them a criminal.
What? Just because someone has committed a crime, that doesn't make them a criminal. That's the definition of what a criminal is. By the way, for those who do not know, Jasmine Crockett is a lawyer. She went to law school. She graduated. She passed the bar exam long before she became a member of Congress. That was her day-to-day job. And presumably she was, well, whether she was good at it or not, she's educated enough to know the definition. The fifth graders know the definition of what a criminal is, someone who commits crimes. And Jasmine Crockett doesn't understand that. Let's go back. I want you to hear that again. These are her words. This is not edited. It is not doctored. There is no AI. These are her words, confirmed at this point. Confirmed. She said this. A lawyer.
And so I do want people to know that just because someone has committed a crime, it doesn't make them a criminal.
Yes, it does. By definition, by law, yes, that is a criminal. But go on, Jasmine Crockett, representative in Texas, in our Congress, and a lawyer. Tell me how you want to rewrite America, how you want to destroy our fundamental bedrock of our nation. Go on.
That is completely different. Being a criminal is more so about your mindset.
Being a criminal is a mindset. This is the voice of the left. And Jasmine Crockett is a progressive, and she is a leftist in our Congress, and she promotes this ideology, which is the same that we get in our colleges at this time. I'm sure she did very well in her law school classes, in her collegiate classes when she was pre-law. I'm sure she did astoundingly well because she's mimicking her professors exactly. It's a mindset. Criminality is a mindset. Well, let me see. You thought of committing a crime. You decided that you wanted to be a crackhead that mugs people. That was in your mind. Then you took the action and you made it a reality. You got caught and you got thrown in jail. You are a criminal. Why? You acted on that mindset. You made a choice. You can think anything you want. Just because you think that you're Napoleon doesn't make you Napoleon. But if you go around acting as if you are Napoleon, then you're insane because you're not Napoleon. Same thing here. You can think and dream about, oh, I want to be a bank robber. Okay, but if you don't go into a bank and rob it, you're not a criminal. That's not the mindset is, oh, I could do this crime, but you didn't do it. So you're not a criminal. You're a criminal only if you actually then go and actually try to rob the bank. Then you are. It is the action, not the thought. It is the action that makes you a criminal. You could think about trying to become some kind of TV or movie drug kingpin, but if you do not sell drugs, you will not be a drug kingpin. Just because you have the mindset doesn't mean it's the reality. In fact, once you start selling those drugs, poison to children, and having people overdose over fentanyl, then you are a drug dealer and a criminal, not before. So nothing that Jasmine Crockett is saying makes any sense unless we are seeing This is the mindset of the left. And because I'm disagreeing with her, because I am pointing out the facts, the empirical, absolute facts of our law, of our legal system, of the basis of the legal system, of actions versus thoughts, I will be called an ist and a phobe, and therefore the left will say they do not need to listen. And they will listen instead to Jasmine Crockett, maybe to spite me somehow. And they will support Jasmine Crockett because she's a black woman. Well, I'm a black Hispanic man. What's that supposed to mean? The fact is, the facts are the facts. The reality is the reality. Actions do define an individual. And when you make the choice to take a criminal action, you are a criminal. It is not your mindset, it is your action. So she is in every aspect wrong, but she is reinforcing that what the left says is the reality they want you to obey. And this is the justification for allowing criminality on the left. Well, if you don't think you're a criminal, then you're not, regardless of your actions. And that justifies the criminal in North Carolina that stabbed Irina Bartuska, stabbed her 22 times in the neck. He didn't think he was a criminal. He just thought he was killing a white woman, but that wasn't a bad thing. I mean, he's a black supremacist, so it's not a bad thing. Therefore, he's not a criminal. The killer of Charlie Kirk, the assassin, they wanted to kill Charlie Kirk, but they weren't doing it because they wanted to be a murderer. They just wanted to end fascism in their mind by doing something completely fascist. So, they're the good guy. Therefore, they're not a criminal. We should let that criminal out. That even though they're a killer, we should let them go free. You can say that about every criminal and every crime in every state across America. Oh, I didn't think it was a crime. I thought I was being a good guy. Whoa, according to Democrats, according to Jasmine Crockett, it's a good thing. Let it open up the jail cell. Let them out. Really? Really? Look, and put that into context, because the left loves to say they love women, they want to protect people. If someone was domestic abuse, a domestic abuser, and according to Jasmine Crockett's mindset, if he didn't think he was being a criminal, if he thought that the woman that he was with deserved to be beaten, well, according to Jasmine Crockett, he's not a criminal. He's not a bad guy, and he shouldn't be in jail. He didn't commit a crime. Therefore, he's not a criminal because he didn't think he was doing a crime. He didn't think it was criminal. So therefore, you should let him out. I really would love to hear from the National Organization of Women and any women's organization, those that are protecting battered women. Do you agree with that? Do you think Jasmine Crockett is correct? Should all of the domestic abusers in jail at this time, should they all be released? The charges dropped and expunged? Should men be allowed to abuse, or anyone be allowed to abuse their partner? Does anyone agree with that? I'm sure the criminals agree with that. The people incarcerated may agree with that. But I don't think anyone else of reasonable mind would agree with that. And yes, I do mean that Jasmine Crockett is not of reasonable mind. But let's hear the last couple of seconds of what she has to say here.
Committing a crime can come for a lot of different reasons.
Crime can come from a lot of different reasons. No, actually it comes from one reason. You decide to make a crime. You decide to commit a crime. You could be poor, but that doesn't mean you're going to commit crime. There are millions around the world, hundreds of millions, billions of people who are poor. They're not all committing crime. They're not going out murdering people. They're not going out stealing. They're not burning down cities. Just because you're poor doesn't mean, well, I'm justified to just break all the laws. You may feel oppressed. That doesn't mean you get to break the law. Millions of people may feel like they are oppressed. That doesn't mean they get to burn down a city. There is no crime. Now, there's lots of reasons for being criminal. Probably are. But if you take criminal action, you're a criminal. It doesn't justify it. Just because you have a reason doesn't mean you get away with it. But again, look at the mindset. And she said this is after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, after people are looking at the divide between the left and the right, and there is a growing massive tension. We are at the boiling point in our nation, and people are very angry with each side. And this is one of the core concerns. We have the freedom of speech for conservatives that is under threat, the left trying to usurp that for themselves to get sympathy. We have the very real threat of murder against conservatives, Republicans, anyone who speaks up and says anything the left doesn't like. And here comes Jasmine Crockett saying, if you don't think you're a criminal, you're not a criminal. If you commit a criminal act, you're still not a criminal. You have to think you're a criminal and think what you're doing is a crime. And then, and only then, your actions become criminal. Which is, to me, a way of saying, go out and kill more conservatives. Go ahead and kill more Republicans. She's justifying the murder of Charlie Kirk, in my opinion, because the context, she's saying this after his assassination, when people are so concerned about crime and assassination and silencing people who have different opinions. She's saying, go right ahead and do it. She knew what she's saying. And again, Jasmine Crockett is not a stupid woman. She got a law degree. She was a practicing lawyer. She knows better. She knows her words make a difference. They have an impact. And people will listen to her and act on her words. She's being completely irresponsible. But look at the environment we have. Comply, do what the left says, and you are absolved of any problem. In fact, the left will come out and defend you if you just obey. If you keep your head down, you comply, and you vote Democrat and support Democrats, they will allow you to break the law. Just like they let the killer in North Carolina out 14 times. Just like they have been defending illegal aliens, going to foreign countries to bring illegal aliens who were legally deported from the United States, bring them back to the United States at the expense of taxpayers. They will fight in courts, and they will fight on the streets, and they will blockade any kind of help for citizens. Like in Texas, Jasmine Crockett, the Texas Democrats ran away from their job, the Texas state legislature. The Democrats ran away and would not do their job to take the federal funding to help Texans who had suffered. Some of them had died. They lost their businesses, their homes, their property, and family. They needed FEMA and federal aid to be able to help rebuild their lives. And the Texas state Democrats ran away, leaving those people harmed, incapable of healing and fixing their lives. And they were held up as heroes because they were fighting against the redistricting, because it would be politically inconvenient for Democrats. It would put them at a disadvantage. They'd have to raise more money. They'd have to work harder to get the same number of votes. And somehow that is worth Texas flood victims continuing to suffer for 3 weeks. And Jasmine Crockett had no problem with that. Again, it's not a crime if you don't think it's a crime. This is the mentality. This is what we're dealing with. This is the environment America is in right now. Justification for the worst of behavior, for incentivizing evil and crime, and blaming anyone but the people who actually committed the crime or those who incentivized and indoctrinated the people to commit those crimes. Jasmine Crockett is an evil woman, in my opinion. You may disagree, but don't tell me you disagree because she's a woman. Don't tell me you disagree because she's black. Those aren't reasons. They're not answers to the question. Because just because she's black, just because she's a woman, doesn't mean that that instantly makes her Mother Teresa. Doesn't work that way. Please, I don't want to see that in the comments. So, in this incredible environment where we are seeing excuse after excuse is allowed to exist, where we have justification for criminality and for not enforcing the law over and over again, we then see that a man who did not like Donald Trump, does not like the Trump administration, does not like the MAGA, America First, right-leaning policies of the president that was elected for those policies. Donald Trump was elected specifically to fulfill the promises he made to American people, and he has been doing so. Whether you like them or not, whether you think he should or not, he is doing what he promised, what he was voted in to do. Over and over again, he is getting that checklist done. And this man went in Texas, went into an ABC affiliate, the same affiliates that said they will not play Jimmy Kimmel because Jimmy Kimmel was insensitive and he was spreading misinformation. And this man went into the ABC Disney affiliate, shot several rounds. First, he drove by and then fired at the building. So he was a drive-by shooter first. Then he drove up to the front of the building, entered the lobby, and fired several more shots. Attempted murder, attempted assassination because of his political beliefs, which are leftist ideology, because he was upset with Donald Trump. And he thought Donald Trump, as is the messaging from Barack Obama and the rest of the left, if Donald Trump, if something happens in our nation, Donald Trump is the cause. Orange man bad, it's his fault. The FCC pulled Jimmy Kimmel. Well, that's evil and bad. Forget the fact that Jimmy Kimmel broke the law and was insensitive and was factually incorrect. Doesn't matter. It's orange man bad. Therefore, I have to punish. That man says he has to punish ABC, he has to punish Disney, and he has to punish Trump and the Trump administration. He had a list in his car and in his home of individuals that he wanted to go after next. This is the consequence of Obama, Jimmy Kimmel, Jasmine Crockett, the left-leaning mainstream media, the BBC, justifying and minimizing the indoctrination and the idea that if someone says something you don't like, it's a microaggression, which equals violence, which means you can react with violence. That's what they've taught an entire generation over the last 10 years, and this is the result. This is the result. Keith Olbermann says he threatened Scott Jennings, who is a center-right journalist on CNN. And I know CNN, not very credible recently as a news organization. But Scott Jennings is a voice of the right, of the moderate right. I call him more of a centrist personally, but those on the left, anyone who's not a socialist progressive is pretty much alt-right these days. The line has been pushed that far to the left. So Scott Jennings is probably considered alt-right by many of the people in the news media. But he's honestly a centrist at best, maybe leaning right. And Scott Jennings took offense with what was done by Obama, what has been said by the mainstream news media, what has been said by Jimmy Kimmel about the death of Charlie Kirk, about what's being said to justify the violence on the left against the right. And he spoke up about it. Keith Olbermann, you may have heard that name. About 20, 25 years ago, he was actually a journalist. He had credibility. He was on ESPN, he was on MSNBC, and he got fired from everywhere. In fact, he is so discredited that even the Huffington Post, the Daily Kos, no one will cover this man. No one will employ him because he is that toxic. He is a great example of the toxic left. I believe he even got kicked off of Blue Sky. I may be wrong on that. But he is the most extreme of the big voices we hear from the former mainstream news media. And he's absolutely batshit crazy. Absolutely, in my opinion. Keith Olbermann decided to tell Scott Jennings that because Scott Jennings pointed out that the evidence says that the assassin of Charlie Kirk is a leftist, well, that's just wrong. Keith Olbermann doesn't agree with that. He doesn't like that. Scott Jennings defended that Jimmy Kimmel would be removed because he broke FCC regulations, because he misinformed the public, because he tainted the emotions of Americans to play a partisan game. And Keith Olbermann did not like that. And therefore, Keith Olbermann's feelings were hurt. That's a microaggression. Therefore, Keith Olbermann put in writing a threat, a credible threat against Scott Jennings, threatening violence against Scott Jennings. I want you to think about that. This is a guy who used to be a journalist at a time when journalists across this nation, when podcasters across this nation, anyone who's ever said anything right-leaning is concerned on whether or not they're going to be targeted. There are lists now of hundreds, thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people on the left saying who they want to get next, who they want to target for violence next. And here is Keith Olbermann saying, no, put Scott Jennings at the top of your list. Scott Jennings should be next. That's a violent threat. And of course, this has been referred to federal authorities, and I hope that Keith Olbermann gets arrested as he should be, and he gets locked up appropriately for the appropriate amount of time for his threat of violence, and we never hear from him again. I would like that. That's not what's going to happen, but that's what I would like to see happen because he is out of his mind. And he is encouraging Keith Olbermann, just like Jasmine Crockett, just like Jimmy Kimmel, just like President Barack Obama and many others on the left. They are encouraging even more violence. And they're going to tell you, I don't know where the violence came from. I don't know why this person was indoctrinated. I don't know why this person would decide violence is the appropriate reaction to their feelings being hurt, their perceived microaggression. I don't know why they would react violently to that, even though we have been reinforcing that they should do exactly that. All right. Now, I promised that I would do a deep dive on Barack Obama, but I wanted you to understand the environment that has been created, the environment we are in now, whether the left intended that or not, and I think they did intend it. I'm talking about the leadership in the left. They intended to create this environment. They've been stoking this fire, and now they're calling out people like Barack Obama to make it look as good. And right off the bat, I have to admit, Barack Obama, eloquent speaker. He is a wonderful orator. He can make things sound really good, but he's evil. Well, some of the things he says are evil. Remember, Barack Obama, by the way, is the guy who authorized the use of drones to remote bomb American citizens in foreign countries, in particular Yemen, without any charges, without a crime actually having been confirmed. Just on the suspicion that American citizens might be a terrorist in Yemen, Barack Obama bombed them. That's your good guy, Obama. That's the innocent, great guy, Obama. We'll talk more about that in a second, but let's hear what Obama said before we heard Jasmine Crockett say that crime doesn't exist. Before Keith Olbermann decided that he wants to select the next target to be harmed, what did Obama say after Jimmy Kimmel was rightly pulled from the airwaves?
Well, speaking of the events of the world, you are in Pennsylvania, as you know, earlier this year, the governor's mansion, the subject of an arson attack, the tragedy in Minnesota back in June, the horrific murder in Utah of a...
Now, notice that this is being front-loaded. So this guy is only talking about events that affected Democrats. There were events that affected Republicans and independents and regular, normal American citizens that he's not bringing up. But he wants to specifically target certain events. Like, in particular, he wants to talk about the Hortman family, which were Minnesota state legislators, killed by a left-leaning individual dressed up as a cop who had a personal beef with the Hortmans because of their voting against the left. And again, the killer was hired, handpicked by Tim Walz, the former vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris. So this is a guy with a huge left-leaning credentials, knew the Hortmans personally, and had a left-leaning grievance against the Hortmans. That's why he killed them. But this guy who's front-loading this question for Barack Obama, yeah, he doesn't want to touch any of that. He doesn't want you to know any of that. He's just glossing it over that. See, the left is being put upon. The left is being targeted. You're not mentioning the decade of targeting of the right. You're not mentioning any of that. You know, remember Biden saying that MAGA is evil. It's a threat to America. The America First movement is a threat to America. Making America great is a threat to America, according to Joe Biden himself. That was just 2 years ago. That if you did not absolutely obey a mandate from Joe Biden to take an experimental medication, inject it into yourself and your children without knowing what the side effects are, with overinflated expectations of the effectiveness of that medication, you were supposed to do that. And if you didn't, you were a danger to America. And they fired you from your jobs on Joe Biden's words. Yeah, he leaves out a lot to paint a very specific picture. Sympathy for the left. Let's see where else he goes with this.
Conservative activist. Are we at an inflection point in our country? Where are we today?
Yes, we're at an inflection point. And I think I've clearly stated the inflection point is because of the left indoctrinating individuals into believing that they have a reason and a right to inflict violence against anyone and especially everyone on the right. Anyone who doesn't agree with them and everyone on the right, no matter how far right they may be, no matter what their reason or justification is. But let's hear what else he has to say.
Well, we are certainly at an inflection point, not just around political violence, but there are a host of larger trends that we have to be concerned about.
Now, I believe he's talking about economics. Yes, Bidenomics failed. Obama's economic policies failed. These are proven facts. That there's no question about that. The recession under the Obama administration was extended because of the Obama policies. You don't have to believe me. There are several studies about that. Look at the cash for clunkers as one example, where that actually extended the slow growth of sales, of car sales in America because of the Cash for Clunkers program. It was a complete abject failure. It actually cost America about $1.4 trillion. Or you could look at the debacle about Obamacare, which was supposed to lower healthcare costs. It didn't. It increased them. Even while Obama was in office, they never fully enacted Obamacare because it doesn't work. It has never worked. And now we have people who admit that. So economically, there are a lot of problems. Crime, as an offshoot of that or as a result of that, is a problem. Yes, we're down from the peak of crime in 2021. We are still higher levels of crime in almost every city, in almost every state of the country, higher levels of crime than in 2019 or any time before that. So we are at a peak. They love to say crime is down versus the 2021 peak, but crime is up versus 2019 and any time before that. So we're up. The trend is up, not down. If you look at it on a graph, any graph, crime is increasing, not decreasing. And in particular, has increased under the policies of Barack Obama and Joe Biden. To an extent, you could also say Bush and others, but it's an increase, not a decrease. So let's see what else Obama has to say.
I think it is important for us at the outset to acknowledge that political violence is not new. It has happened at certain periods in our history.
It has happened throughout our entire history. Just as this is true for any nation in the world. Every nation in the world has experienced political violence. In fact, the United States has less political violence than virtually any nation in the history of mankind. We are less likely to experience political violence in the United States because we have a system that is a peaceful transition of power. We don't go from the king to another member of the monarchy or of the royalty, and therefore there are family disputes and there are all-out wars. We don't have warlords deciding that they are now in charge of a region or the entire country like we see in, say, the Sudan or in Haiti, where gangs just jump up and take over the government. We don't have that in the United States. We have a peaceful transfer through our election system. So it is unusual in the United States versus any other country in the world. So yes, we have violence like everyone else, but far, far less of it. And in particular, the violence we are seeing, why is it happening? Why did Steve Scalise get shot by a Bernie supporter? Why did Charlie Kirk get shot? He's not even in elected politics. He was just a guy talking. Why did three people try to assassinate Donald Trump? That's the question. Let's go on.
But outset, we are certainly at an inflection point, not just around political violence, but there are a host of larger trends that we have to be concerned about. I think it is important for us at the outset to acknowledge that political violence is not new. It has happened at certain periods in our history. But it is something that it is anathema to what it means to be a democratic country.
We're not a democratic country, and he knows that. He's very clear. He was a constitutional lawyer, and he's been president of the United States. He knows he's not. He's saying we're a democratic country because he's supporting Democrats, because he's trying to push a message that you should support Democrats. It's a subliminal and subtle thing. And he is a good enough speaker, he is a good enough orator that he knows these little things that he's saying, the subtle way he is saying certain things, puts an impression in the mind. It is a subliminal trick that Obama is using to say that we're a democratic nation. We're not. But it makes you think Democrat. It makes you think positively of Democrats, and Obama knows that. And that's part of his setup here. There's violence, but Democrats are our nation. and it gives you the impression, it sets up the seed in the mind that Democrats good, everyone else bad. And he knows this. He's doing it on purpose. It's a manipulation. But let's go on.
And regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, what happened to Charlie Kirk was horrific and a tragedy.
Okay, remember, he said, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, it is horrific. It is a tragedy. I do not dispute that. I do not disagree with that. He says that. This is his throwaway line. This is now to excuse anything he says after that, because now he is going to qualify that. And that's very intentional by Obama. He set it up so that he is impeachable. He has a wall built up around him now, that America is democratic. Violence is against Democrats. That's the subtle nugget that he's put into your mind. And he says, but I'm a good guy. Like everyone, I agree. What happened to Charlie Kirk? Absolutely horrible. So you cannot question him. He is setting up an argument, a steel man, to protect himself from what he's going to say next. And what is he going to say next?
What happened, as you mentioned, to the state legislators in Minnesota? That is horrific. It is a tragedy.
Okay, so he mentioned Charlie Kirk, which happened after Melissa Hortman was shot. And by the way, there are several things that have happened in the news media. You've seen it. We've covered it since that time. What about North Carolina? What about Derek Perry? He doesn't want to talk about North Carolina and the young woman being stabbed. He doesn't want to talk about Derek Perry and him protecting people with a firearm. No, he wants to skip the stories in between, and he's changing the time frame. So, yes, he's talking about Charlie Kirk. Now he's going to go to the Hortmans. Why? Because he's going to use their attack to steelman his argument that the left is justified, the right are the bad guys. That's what he's building to. This is a setup. Because if he's actually talking about this in the proper way, which would be by time, like when they happened, so you talk about it was horrific what happened to Melissa Hortman and to Charlie Kirk. Why? That's the way it happened in time. And if you're talking just about political figures, well, then you wouldn't be talking about Charlie Kirk and Hortman. They're not political figures. Charlie Kirk was never elected. So he's mashing these things together and he's arranging them in a time frame so that he is lending more and more credence and sympathy and empathy with his point of view rather than any other point of view you may actually have or you may encounter. Let's see what else he has to say.
And there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The central...
Did you hear some people giggle? And say, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There were people in the audience laughing. You may have heard that. Very subtle. A few, not a lot of people, a few people were laughing, meaning that they think there are ifs, ands, or buts about whether or not it was horrific for Charlie Kirk and or Melissa Hortman for being killed. I don't agree with that. I think they were both horrific. I think both of their killers were maniacs, but for very, very different reasons. And I think only one of them was being promoted, and that happens to be... actually, the idea of someone offending you by their actions, by their words, is a microaggression, which therefore is violence, and therefore you can retaliate with violence. I think the left didn't realize that could be applied against their people as well as anyone else. They've always assumed that the only way that would be applied is against the right, anyone who's center and right of the left. They've never assumed that anyone would ever take that logic and apply it against their own people. That's what I believe. I may be wrong on that, but that's the way the indoctrination has come out. And every time we've heard it explained and reviewed and stated over and over again for the last decade, Well, that kind of tells you. But let's hear where Obama's going to go with this.
The premise of our democratic system is that we have to be able to disagree.
It's not a democratic process. It's a constitutional process. The constitutional process, which are God-given rights, not Democrat-given rights, not government-given rights. It's constitutional. They're by God. We have the right to free speech because God gave us life. And we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not the guarantee of happiness. So Obama's wrong on this. And again, why is he saying democratic? He should be saying constitutional or God-given rights. He's saying democratic because, again, he is building up the case for Democrats to get the sympathy and empathy and everyone else being the bad guy. Again, he is an excellent speaker. He knows exactly what he is doing. He is using these words very specifically to set up a certain type of mindset because he's about to justify Jimmy Kimmel and, in fact, try to blame anyone but the shooter for the attack against Charlie Kirk. So let's get to it.
And have sometimes really contentious debates without resort to violence. And
yes, everyone agrees with that. That's not what happens in the real world because we've seen that with many debates on the left. But that is what is the ideal. And in fact, that's what Charlie Kirk was doing. He was going to college campuses, which are insanely left-leaning, and talking with individuals who completely disagreed with him and having conversations with them. And he got shot for that because the left didn't like it, because they didn't have a better answer than what Charlie Kirk could provide. And since they couldn't beat him in the debate, and he wasn't going to stop, and he wasn't an elected official, so they couldn't vote him out of office, nor could they bribe him, so they killed him. But let's go on.
and when it happens to some, but even if you think they're quote unquote on the other side of the argument, that's a threat to all of us.
It should be a threat to all of us. It's not. It's the left is saying they're threatened by the right. The right is saying they are threatened by the left. The evidence overwhelmingly is that we do see evidence that the left is being encouraged and indoctrinated to be violent on varying degrees, not necessarily murder, but violent and aggressive towards the right. That's what the colleges came up with. That is the mindset and the mantra of the left, not the right. That's why when you have a leftist protest, you invariably, no matter what the protest is about, no matter where it is in this country, when you see a leftist protest, you will, 90% of the time, you will see that there is also going to be vandalism, arson, violence of varying degrees, the disruption of people's lives, blocking off roads so that fire engines and police cars and ambulances can't get to their jobs. They can't get to somewhere they need to be because protesters are in front of the road. That's a violation. That's a violation of your rights and your ability to live your life. You see that there are autonomous zones, which at this moment still exist. There's an autonomous zone in Berkeley. I believe it's still in existence right now. You have the Defenders of the Atlanta Forest. That's been around, terrorizing Atlanta, trying to commit arson down there. These are all left-leaning. There is not one autonomous zone in America that is anything but left-leaning. Only the left does that. So Obama's painting a picture of equality of the problem when it's not an equal problem. It is overweighted for the left to be more of a problem than the right. The right doesn't burn down cities. The left does. The right doesn't have a protest that results in violence and
we have to
vandalism.
be clear and forthright in condemning it. Now, That doesn't mean that we can't have a debate about the ideas that people who were victims of political violence were promoting. And that's
It's very confusing what he's saying there. But I think he's trying to say we should have more discussion. Except the left is notorious for not having discussion with anyone except other people on the left. Great example of that, simple one for everyone, common person knows. The left ran away from X to go to Blue Sky. Why? Because they didn't want to talk to other people. They wanted to be in an echo chamber. They only wanted their ideas to be spoken about and supported. And if they were on any other platform, well, people would say, I think you're wrong, or they would want to debate. The left doesn't want to debate. The left wants you to comply, and to do so without question, without any kind of debate. As someone who's in the political sphere and someone who does political commentary, it is almost, and I can tell you from personal experience, dealing with members of the left, podcasters and political commentators, it is almost impossible to get someone on the left to appear in an interview on someone on a right-leaning commentator's show, or to be in a panel discussion with people who have different views than their own. It is almost impossible to get that done. They refuse on a regular basis. It's very, very difficult. But that being said, let's go on, Obama. Go ahead.
a mistake as well. And so, look, yep. Obviously, I didn't know Charlie Kirk.
But you could have. There's no reason why you couldn't have. Charlie Kirk never turned you away. You could have met him at any time. You're a superstar. You were former president of the United States. Charlie Kirk was active and he was building up TPSU, Turning Point USA, chapters in colleges while Obama was in office. So you could have met him. You chose not to. You didn't engage with him because you chose not to, but you could have.
Was generally aware of some of his ideas. I think
Generally aware, lots of videos, hundreds of hours of videos online, thousands of hours online. I'm sure you were more than just generally aware, or you could have been more than generally aware. You didn't care. Let's be honest. You didn't care. Now, I'm not saying that Obama has to follow everybody all the time. There are a lot of people on the left I don't follow and I don't care. Fair enough. I'm not saying you have to know everybody. I don't know everything Destiny has said. I don't follow everything that Hassan Piker says. I do follow some of the things. So I get where Obama is. But, Charlie Kirk is in his circles. He is having impact on the people that Obama is running, supporting in elections. I would think he would know a little bit more than a little bit, but okay, fair enough.
I think those ideas were wrong.
Why? Those ideas were wrong. Why? This is horrible for Obama. And he's going to gloss this over. It is probably the most important thing in the entire discussions he's having so far. He disagrees with Charlie Kirk. Why? Why do you think Charlie Kirk was wrong? This is vitally important, especially at this moment. For Barack Obama to say, I disagreed with Charlie Kirk because of X, Y, Z, and he deserved to live. He deserved to be able to say that. I respect Charlie Kirk for saying X, Y, Z that I think is wrong. This is the most critical thing. Why? You have to say why, and you have to acknowledge that because of the First Amendment, because we are American citizens, because we are born with the right given by God to speak, Charlie Kirk was okay. It was perfectly fine. even though a former president, a deified or near deified Democrat, didn't like it, you accept it and you are okay with it. That's what he has to say. Let's see what he does say.
But that doesn't negate the fact that what happened was a tragedy and that I mourn for him and his family. He's a young man.
That's not the same thing. I feel bad that he died. No, that's not the answer. Yes, it is bad that a father, a businessman, a husband was killed because he spoke. Yes, but Barack Obama, when you said, I don't agree with him, you need to then say why you didn't agree with him and why it's okay because of the First Amendment. That the First Amendment allows Charlie Kirk to say things you, Barack Obama, President Obama, don't agree with. That's what you need to do. Remember, Barack Obama was the president who said Fox News isn't real news. People shouldn't look at them. They are a real news organization. He just didn't like them. And he said that about half a dozen other news organizations as well as Fox News. But Barack Obama doesn't get to decide what is and is not a news station just because of what he likes, like every president before him and after him. You don't like them. Fantastic. They're still real news stations. But he had a bias and he made his bias known. And he tried to influence those companies. He tried to bankrupt Fox News by using his influence as president to turn the public away from them. It didn't work. Now, in terms of, again, dealing with Charlie Kirk, dealing with the murder, this is about the First Amendment. It's about the freedom of speech. It's about reuniting the country. And in particular, the left is the one that is initiating the violence. He needs to speak to his people. The people that said, transform America, I don't need to know transforming into what. The people who said, just transform it, because they fundamentally don't believe in the American values as they exist, because they have been taught not to believe in the American values. So when Barack Obama came out and said, I'm going to transform America, they didn't ask what into what. They said, okay. There's a big difference. And those are the people who are so deeply indoctrinated that when you tell them microaggression equals violence, they say, then I can be violent. Those are the people you're supposed to be talking to right now, Barack Obama, not to the voters, not to the moderates, not to the right. You're talking to those extremists. They're the ones on your side of the aisle that are causing the problem. You need to talk to them. And he's not. Let me go. Let's see. Let's go forward.
With two small children and a wife who obviously, and a huge number of friends and supporters who cared about him. And so we have to extend grace to people during their period of mourning and shock.
No. It's not about grace during their mourning. We have to extend grace to people who have opinions we don't share. That's the answer. Barack Obama, you know this. You were a congressional professor, a lawyer, a very intelligent man. I won't say that you're stupid, because you're not. You know these things. You were president. You know and have experienced these things. This isn't about mourning. We have to have grace for those we disagree with. That's why the First Amendment exists, for the things that people say that we don't like. And Obama knows this. Constitutional professor. You know this. You're an attorney. You know the First Amendment is there about what we don't like, to protect what I do not like and do not want to hear. It is there to protect that, because everybody has something that they don't like that someone else has said, and it has to be protected. Otherwise, no one's First Amendment rights are protected. That's critical. But again, Obama knows this, and that's why he's not saying this. He's making it about, okay, after the fact. He's implicitly justifying the violence to silence people, to force them to comply or punish them ultimately with their life if they do not comply. And then we will mourn, and you must have grace for the family that mourned because you had to punish their family member for not obeying, for not complying. Have grace. We had to punish them, that family, for not bowing down. Give them grace. That's what Obama is saying. And he is smart enough, and he is an eloquent enough speaker, and he was prepared for this moment. He was set up. He knew walking onto that stage, he would be asked this question. He knew when that person on the stage wound up with that question, laid out the playing field for him. He knew exactly what he was going to be talking about. He is prepared for this, as prepared as anyone can be. He has staff that would have made sure he was absolutely rocket ready for this, unlike Kamala Harris. And this is his answer. He knows exactly what he's saying here. And what he's saying is really horrific because of what he's not saying, what he should be saying, and what he knows he could say, which would actually lower the temperature in this nation. But that's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to protect Democrats. He's trying to protect his ideology. He's trying to create distance between the shooter and his ideology to protect it. This is propaganda. This is point blank propaganda. Go on, Barack Obama. Go on and preach more.
We can also, at the same time, say that I disagree with the idea that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake.
Wait a minute. Is that Ibrahim Kendi that you're talking about, or are you talking about Charlie Kirk? Because Ibrahim Kendi and the critical race theory proponents, they have a problem with a lot of those policies. Affirmative action, Dr. Martin Luther King, they have issues with that because they don't agree with that ideology. So Charlie Kirk may have had a problem with it as well, but for different reasons. But they both disagree. So to say, oh, well, Charlie Kirk's being a racist, because why did you point that out? Again, you could have said we should have grace for those we disagree with. He didn't. And then he said, he's against the Civil Rights Act. Why? Again, I asked the question, why was Charlie Kirk upset about the Civil Rights Act? It's not because he didn't like black people. That's a blatant lie on the left. That is a statement that the left says so people don't pay attention. Again, it is meant to dismiss Charlie Kirk. It is not meant to have people actually look up Charlie Kirk talking with black people about their questions to him. And he was questioned many, many, many times by black people about whether or not he respected and or liked black people, and whether or not he stood up for the rights of black Americans on a regular basis. There are many, many, many videos of that. Obama is dismissing all of them. He's against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Yeah, and there may be good reason for that. And again, Barack Obama, you didn't bother to check why he disagreed or what about that he disagreed. And now you're just saying, well, he's wrong. Blanket, he's just wrong. What about Ibrahim Kendi, who supports and is one of the major proponents of critical race theory, who also disagrees with the 1964 Civil Rights Act for entirely different reasons? What about that? Oh, but you're not going to say he's a racist, but you will imply Charlie Kirk is a racist and dismiss him out of hand. Say, see, he was a nut job. You got to have grace for his family because he's a nut job. Didn't you feel bad for them that he was such a nut job he didn't know civil rights? You're being dishonest, Barack Obama. You're being dismissive of a dead man without bothering to actually know what you're talking about. As you said, you didn't follow him. You didn't pay attention. You could have researched him before, because again, you knew you were going to be asked this. You could have looked at what he said about a couple of videos about him addressing Black issues from Black people at colleges. You didn't, because you don't care. Because this isn't about that. You're just using that as a shield to hide behind. It's really sad. Go on.
That's not
He's getting applauded on that because he hit the right nerve. He used the race card, and he's getting applauded for it because he dismissed Charlie Kirk. And in dismissing Charlie Kirk, he elevates the killer and the reason why the killer took action. He's justifying the murder of Charlie Kirk here. And he is eloquent enough of a speaker. He knows he is doing that.
politicizing the issue.
Yes, it is you politicizing the issue, because Charlie Kirk didn't get shot because he disagreed with the Civil Rights Act. You can disagree with any policy. As I said, I disagree with your policy, Barack Obama, to be able to bomb American citizens and overseas on the accusation that they might be a terrorist. You bombed American citizens on that reasoning alone. I disagree with it. You can be critiqued about that. Any legislation can be critiqued. I don't believe in the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't agree with affirmative action. Why? Because they implicitly require that I must acknowledge that I am somehow lesser than anyone or everyone else, and that I am incapable of being able to succeed without the government backing me up, that the government has to prop me up for me to be a success. That's what I believe the ERA means to women. That's what I believe that affirmative action means to men, to Black men, Black women. That's my problem with it. But you're not investigating that. You're just saying, well, you're against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. You're just a bad, dumb person. No, there's a fundamental, very important reason for my objection that is fundamental to that argument, to that discussion. You're throwing it out offhand. And you're saying, see, I've dismissed him. And he's getting applauded for that. It's sad. It is sad. And he knows what he's doing.
It's making an observation.
No, you're being political. If you were making an observation, you would say, and see, people didn't understand Charlie Kirk. If you were observing that, saying, well, yeah, he was against the Civil Rights Act. But, I looked at a couple of his videos talking about that. He had a couple of points. I don't agree with all of them, but he deserved the chance to make his argument, to make his case. See, that would be not being political. That would be turning down the temperature. Instead, you're ratcheting the temperature up for all the people who supported and liked Charlie Kirk and actually saw the videos where he explained why he had an argument, just like I just explained why I have a problem with affirmative action and the ERA, because I think it lessens the people it's supposed to be protecting. You see, you're diminishing them. You're crushing them, Barack Obama. You're not helping the situation. You're making this worse.
About who are we as a country? I can say that I disagree with the suggestion that my wife or Justice Jackson does not have adequate brain processing power.
Well, you can have that opinion. Others can have an opinion otherwise. Now, in particular, I can speak more so to Ketanji Jackson Brown, the Supreme Court Justice, who was hired because of DEI. She had the right checkboxes. I've covered this multiple times now on this program, in live streams and in video, going through, and we know this from the very simplest statement. I can prove that as simple as Joe Biden didn't pick the best Supreme Court justice. He picked the best Supreme Court justice that filled the check boxes he had. They had to be a woman, they had to be Black, they had to be young, they had to be a Democrat. And they had to be a judge. Those were the criteria. And so because those criteria were the limits on who could be chosen, Joe Biden, by definition, could not, unless he was insanely lucky, could not pick the best person. And even if he did pick the perfect person, there would always be the doubt because he had limiting criteria in his search. So we have seen that Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor, as well as Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, have both taken Ketanji Jackson Brown to task and embarrassed her because of her recent Supreme Court dissents, which were sophomoric and ranting. She is an activist, not a judge. She's a DEI hire. Read her dissent. Look at why Sotomayor actually had to slap her down, had to distance herself and ostracize Ketanji Jackson Brown. Yeah. So when you say she doesn't have the processing power to be a Supreme Court justice because she is an activist, there's some justification for that. And you can say, well, Michelle Obama doesn't have the mental processing power to be a president, which many people want her to be. She may be a good lawyer, don't know, because she didn't really practice law. But she's not a politician, and she's not presidential. She doesn't have the processing power for that. And you know what? There's a lot of people who don't have the processing power for that. I don't have the processing power to be a president. Do not. That's not an embarrassment. That's not diminishing. It's just a fact. And so 90% of the planet don't have the processing power to be a president. That doesn't mean that you have to be overly intelligent, but it does have a unique set, criteria set for an individual. And no, Michelle Obama doesn't have it. Neither does, and Ketanji Jackson Brown doesn't have the criteria, the capabilities to be a good, even bad Supreme Court justice. She's a fantastic activist. They're both great activists. They're not good politicians, and they're not good Supreme Court justices. It's a fair statement. If you look at the context of what's being talked about. But Barack Obama, you don't want context. You don't want people to understand the full discussion and why that was said about Michelle Obama, why that was said about Ketanji Jackson Brown. You don't want the people to discuss and understand that and to say, well, there might be some credibility to that. You want to dismiss Charlie Kirk. You are on stage dismissing this man that died to justify his murder and to protect Jimmy Kimmel and Democrats. That's why you're on this stage. And that is just insulting. Go on. Let's hear more.
I can say that I disagree that Martin Luther King was awful.
That's Ibrahim Kendi. That's a black college professor. Critical race theory. The critical race theorists say they don't like Martin Luther King Jr. So that's not a race thing, but you're trying to make it into a race thing because there's black professors who are absolutely, there's a whole movement of them, and they happen to be leftist socialist professors who really don't like Martin Luther King. But okay, let's go on.
I can disagree with some of...
By the way, I'm not aware of Charlie Kirk saying he didn't like Martin Luther King. I'm not aware of that. I don't. If there's a video of that, please let me know. I'm not aware of him saying that. He may not agree with the policies. That has nothing to do with the man. It's like saying, oh, you know what? I disagree with some of the things that Gandhi promoted, but that doesn't mean I don't respect Gandhi. I don't like some of his policies. I don't like the way that his actions led to Pakistan splitting from India. You could say that. That has nothing to do with Gandhi the man. So again, you're being very dismissive and very generic when you should be hyper-specific right now in what you're saying, Barack Obama, and you're doing it on purpose.
The broader suggestions of that liberals and Democrats are promoting a conspiracy to displace whites. And
there is an argument for that, which has been made by the left and on the right. There is an argument for that. We do know that the native population of most of the first world nations around the world have been dropping. And that is a consequence of left-leaning policies like abortion. And that's been a major factor in reducing the rate of births. And right now, many, I think almost all of the first world nations have reached an unsustainable amount of birth rates. So for the countries for each of those first world nations to be able to maintain the quality of life that they have right now, you need more people, which means we need more immigration. You can do that legally, or you could do it illegally. And it seems Democrats have been very happy to do it illegally, which is a lot faster. And they don't have to pay, they don't have to give away as many rights. It's, basically you're importing slaves. Pointing that out, whether you like it or not, doesn't dismiss it and say, well, it's meaningless, it's stupid, we shouldn't even be talking about that. Yes, we should, because there are factors in there that you may not like, but they are true. Now, maybe the conclusion is incorrect. Maybe. We don't know. Let's have the conversation, because it is a credible question based on the policies and the way they've been enacted. The open border policy is happening at the exact same time that we are reaching unsustainable levels of birth rates in the United States with the native population. How do we maintain our population? I wonder. Oh, open border, 8 million new people. Gee, odd that they happen at the same time. Could that be a coincidence? Absolutely. Could that be on purpose? Maybe. I won't know unless we have a conversation about it, until we debate it, until we look at all the evidence. But Barack Obama, you're dismissing it offhand as some nut job, crazy idea that could never be possibly true. And that is insulting. And again, you're dismissing yet another idea from Charlie Kirk to build up this portfolio of things you're dismissing about him. You're minimizing him. You are insulting a dead man. That's really, really disgusting, Barack Obama. And you know you're doing it because you're an eloquent, smart man.
replace them by ushering in illegal immigrants. Those are all topics that we have to be able to discuss honestly.
But you're not being honest, and you're not being fair, and you're not presenting them in an honest or fair way. You're being very, very biased. But let's go on.
And forthrightly. While we still insist that in that process of debate, we respect other people's right to say things that we profoundly disagree with.
But you're not respecting what people have said that you don't agree with. You didn't do it when you were president. You're not doing it now. You haven't done it since you've been president. That's not, and there is evidence. There are hours upon hours of evidence of you not respecting people who disagree with you. I'm not saying that you have to agree with everybody who disagrees with you or that you have to like what they have to say, but you are not an example of someone who actually respects those who disagree with you, and you don't engage with them or their ideas. And you're doing it on this stage right now. You don't like Charlie Kirk. You didn't like the fact that he was a conservative and that he was popular. It comes out in what you have been saying. You have been dismissing him the entire time you're on this stage. You're being a hypocrite. Let's go on.
That's how we should approach this. Now, the last point I'll make on this, or building on a point I made earlier, I've been very impressed with Governor Cox in Utah and how he's approached some of these issues.
You mean Governor Cox, who said that, well, no, never mind. Go ahead. He wants the death penalty. That was his approach in Utah. We're going to give the death penalty to this kid. But we'll see. I'm very sure Obama doesn't agree with that, but we'll go on.
I suspect Governor Cox and I disagree on a whole bunch of stuff.
Absolutely.
He is a Republican, a self-professed conservative Republican. But
You are a socialist? A progressive socialist? I mean, you never really answer that, just like you didn't answer transform America into what. But as a consequence of what you have done and what you have said, you're a socialist, a progressive socialist. So, okay, now we understand what the difference is, because saying that Governor Cox is a self-professed conservative Republican, as opposed to what's the counter there? So again, you're being disingenuous here, but go on.
in his response to this tragedy, as well as his history of how he engages with people who are political adversaries, he has shown, I think, that it is possible for us to disagree while abiding by a basic code of how we should engage in public debate.
You mean like Charlie Kirk did, where Charlie Kirk never advocated for violence, never advocated for discrimination. Charlie Kirk sat relatively calmly and talked to people. You mean like that? Like you're giving credit to Governor Cox when you should be giving credit to Charlie Kirk for why Charlie Kirk got killed. But you don't want to talk about Charlie Kirk. You don't want to reference him in any positive light. You want to diminish him, not raise him up, so that your party and your ideology look better in comparison. So you would rather raise up Arizona Governor Cox and make him look better for doing what Charlie Kirk died because of doing the same thing Charlie Kirk already did. You're going to raise up the governor rather than Charlie Kirk because it serves your political purpose better. People aren't noticing. I'm sure many people who watch this the first time didn't catch that's what you're doing. But you're an expert orator. You know exactly what you're doing.
I think your own governor here, Josh Shapiro, has done.
Got to have the name drop. Again, Governor Cox, he's a Republican. He's great. But you know what? Here's a great Democrat, a potential candidate for the 2028 presidential run. Josh Shapiro, another presidential candidate, another Democrat, great candidate, always has to offset. Can't just leave it at Governor Cox and move on. Can't just say Charlie Kirk did this right the first time. Can't give him any credit. No, we got to put this on Democrats. We have to spin the Democrats. We have to spin the ideology to make it better, to raise it up at all costs. Because there's no reason to talk about
the same
Shapiro.
thing. When I was president, in the aftermath of tragedies, when Dylan Roof went into a black church and
race card, this is the race card. Dylan, there were several mass shootings during the Obama administration. He's picking one specifically that's racial. He's doing that on purpose. What about all the black on black gang deaths during there were tens of thousands of young black men that died while you were president. If we want to talk about guns and deaths and violence, let's talk about that. We can talk about that. You want to pick one guy who did a very terrible, racist, evil individual. Fantastic. We can talk about that. That's not comparable to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk wasn't killed. Well, actually, Charlie Kirk was killed because he's white, and because he's a Christian, and because he's a conservative, and because he spoke to people. He's very much like MLK. He's very much like Gandhi. But, okay, you want to use the race card right now, and you're going to say, oh, well, conservatives do bad things because you're winding up towards Trump. That's what you're doing now. You're using Dylan Root, and now that we're talking about the bad guys, you're going to talk about Republican bad guys, and you're going to go over to Trump. You're going to skip over Steve Scalise completely. But let's find out what goes on.
Based on his own words, shot a group of folks who were engaged in Bible study and who had invited him in.
Do you think he's going to bring up the BLM Dallas sniper shooter? Do you think he's going to bring that up? What about the DC sniper, the duo, two people that were traveling around DC and they were doing sniper shooting as well? Do you think he's going to bring that up? Because, by the way, the shooter in Dallas was black. The DC shooter, the sniper, they were both black as well. You think he's going to bring that up? I bet you he won't bring up them because the race card doesn't apply there. But this it does.
And according to him, it was for racist reasons.
And he's an insane maniac. Okay, the shooter is a bad guy. And the shooter in Charlie Kirk is a bad guy, a twisted, evil individual. Are you comparing Dylan Root and Tyler Robinson? They're both twisted, evil, demented people. But I don't think that's where you're going. Let's see.
As President of the United States, my response was not, who may have influenced this troubled young man to engage in that kind of violence, and now let me...
Yes, you should have. As President of the United States, you should have investigated is there a root cause why this kid, Dylan Root, decided to be a racist, and not only to be a racist, but to then take that racism to the ultimate act of killing black people. Yes, you should, as president, should have enabled the FBI, the government, to investigate that to see if there's an endemic, systemic problem that could be resolved. You should, as president, do that. You didn't. You didn't do that. Instead, you said the right wing was bad. Conservatives were bad. Republicans were bad. It's their ideology. I'm paraphrasing here. But yeah, you should have.
Go after my political opponents and use that.
No, not the political opponents, although you did. I was alive then. A lot of people who are on the internet right now weren't alive then. They didn't live through it. And if you try and search it on the Google, well, Google is scrubbing the internet. The AI is scrubbing the internet. There's a lot of things that you did, a lot of scandals during the Obama administration that they won't see because it's been scrubbed and no one talks about it. But it happened. And those of us who were alive during that time remember it. But okay, let's go on.
George Bush. Again, I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff.
Actually, you guys agreed on a lot.
But he is a good, gracious man, and one of the, I thought, most commendable things that he did after 9/11, the most horrific thing to happen in the United States during the course of my lifetime, in my memory, in the aftermath of this terrible tragedy, made a point. We are going to go after the people who perpetrated this. But he explicitly went out of his way to say, we are not at war against Islam, and systematically and repeatedly talked about how we can't use this as a way to divide and target.
But it was a fight about radical Islam, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. Yeah, that's radical Islam, fanatical terrorist Islam, Hamas, Hezbollah. Yeah, that's radical terrorists. That is a war that we are in and that we have been fighting all the way back to the Carter administration in 1979. We have been fighting against terrorist, radical Islam. Yeah, you can say that. It's true. But it's not that we're against all of Islam. We're not trying to fight every nation where there's a Muslim or trying to fight Muslims themselves. There's a huge Muslim population throughout the United States and quickly growing, and no one's really upset with them. They're living their life. We're living our life. No one cares except when it interferes with our life, which is what fanatical, radical Islamists do. And I'm talking about people like Hamas. I'm talking about Hezbollah. I'm talking about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yeah, there is a difference. So you're playing loose and fast with some of the words and definitions and the time frame because you're counting on the fact that most of the people on the internet right now weren't alive back in 2001. They don't know what was going on and what was being said. So you think you're safe, but you're not.
Fellow Americans. And so when I hear,
by the way, Bush was highly criticized after 2001, after his State of the Union address. He was highly criticized after that throughout the wars that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was massively criticized for that. And he was called a racist by the left because of Muslims. So you're being disingenuous.
not just our current president, but his aides, who have a history of calling political opponents vermin.
Okay, so now we're at the point where it's orange man bad. Donald Trump is a problem. Donald Trump said mean things. He had mean tweets. And so did you, Barack Obama. And so did Joe Biden. And so did Kamala Harris. So don't pretend that you're higher and mightier than any other president that ever existed. And the rhetoric that has been said by Keith Olbermann, by Jasmine Crockett, by, what's his name? Jimmy Kimmel. Yeah, that rhetoric that's been said by Bill Maher, that's been said by CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times. This has been a decade of demonizing people who are on the right, who are MAGA, believe in America first. You have demonized them all. The people who didn't get the jab, you demonize them all. The left is just as demonizing, just as vitriolic, and in fact, more so, because you are, again, going into the colleges and the high schools and indoctrinating kids that being white is being evil and being black is being a victim. You have indoctrinated the kids to believe that if someone says something that you don't like, you're offended. That is a microaggression, which equals violence, which means you can be violent against them. Do not play this moral superiority game. You do not win at that. Orange man bad is not the answer to every problem. It is not the root core of every problem facing America. Many of these problems going back to your administration or decades before that. The youth may not be old enough to have experienced and to realize that, but some of us have been around long enough to know the truth. Let's go on.
Enemies who need to be targeted.
America does have enemies that need to be targeted. That's true.
That speaks to a broader problem that we have right now.
No, I don't think it does in the way you're saying it. You're saying Orange Man bad is a problem. America First and MAGA are a problem. This is the implication that you are not so subtly putting out there to try and justify your side in attacking private civilians who just wanted to talk. That's what you're doing, Barack Obama, and you're doing it poorly. This is so sick. Go on.
And something that we're going to have to grapple with, all of us, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, independents. But we have to recognize that on both sides, undoubtedly there are people who are extremists and who say things that are contrary to
bull. Oh my God, it's both sides are at fault. No, that isn't really true. Again, who controls the high schools and the colleges? The teachers' unions. Who? And that's Democrats. Who controls the news media? The Democrats and the liberals, progressives. Who controls entertainment and a large growing part of sports? Democrats and liberals, progressives. So no, it isn't a both sides thing. You have a full court press by the left against the right. And yes, the right does have its own issues, not nearly as severe, not nearly as omnipresent. And the right doesn't go around saying, hey, the answer to all of our problems is burn down that city. Go have, when we have a protest, have a riot as well, vandalize, arson, kidnap people, kill people. Let's have an autonomous zone. That isn't the answer by the right, but it is the answer on the left. It is not an equal playing field in any way, shape, or form. To say it's both sides is bull. It's just bull.
what I believe are America's core values. But I will say that those extreme views were not in my White House.
Yes, they were. Lois Lerner, just right off the top of my head, Lois Lerner is one of the big scandals during the time in your White House. Wait a minute. What about the beer summit? Remember when you, Barack Obama, injected the presidency and the federal government into local police politics of a small community because your friend, who happened to be black, had a issue with a police officer who was doing his job lawfully. And it was such an embarrassment and blowback when you found out your friend, the professor, was wrong. And the fact that the president, you had used your presidential power to inject yourself into local politics. When the blowback came from that, you had to have the beer summit to try and make it all blow over and look like it wasn't a big deal. That was your administration. Trayvon, you put yourself into the Trayvon case. My son could have been Trayvon. I could have been Trayvon. Well, then you would have raised Trayvon poorly if he was your son. You would have screwed up. You would have made a massive mistake if your son was Trayvon because of what Trayvon was doing. He was no innocent child when he died. And whether the media wanted to get pictures of him back when he was 9, instead of actually showing what he actually was looking like and how he was actually walking around with guns and trying to pose like a gangster. You know what? There's a big difference. Yes, you did have scandals, President Obama. You had many, many scandals. Benghazi, DACA, you had a lot of scandals during your presidency. Stop trying to be holier than thou. You just want to pretend that no one remembers what happened. We were alive then. There is video, there are records of what happened back then. I hate that he's lying to the public.
I wasn't embracing them.
Yes, you did.
I wasn't empowering them. I wasn't.
Yes, you did. You empowered BLM. In fact, the whole reason why anyone knew about BLM and Antifa out of that was because you brought BLM into the White House. You lifted up this very small organization and you lifted it to national attention and national influence when you didn't have to. There was no need for it. But you did that. And that laid the groundwork for 2020 and riots across this entire country. Children being killed, autonomous zones in 22 of our major cities. You did that. That was your actions, Barack Obama.
Putting the weight of the United States government behind extremist views.
Again, BLM, yes, you did. Yes, you did. I just gone through a couple of scandals off the top of my head in my memory, and I can find more. I've got dozens of videos about this and articles that I've written about this during your time in office. Yes, Obama, you weren't perfect. You weren't holier than thou, and you did enable your side to attack others. You did it on a regular basis.
And that is when we have the weight of the United States government behind extremist views, we've got a problem.
Then we had a problem under your administration, Barack Obama. You did enable extremist views. Again, I've just gone over just a handful of them. You had over a dozen different scandals during the time you were in office. Many of them were based on race because you made them about race. So yes, you did enable this. You did make this a problem in America. You did raise the temperature. Everyone was hoping for a post-racial president, and you gave us a hyper-racial president. So yes, blame yourself first. I understand you're in an auditorium with a bunch of your allies, people who worship and deify you, so they're not going to call you out. I'm not one of them. You have a host of people online who say, well, you're black, so you can't say anything bad about Barack Obama. Screw that. You were a terrible president. And I will call you out because you are that flawed, and you do not get to rewrite history just because you like that.
And so your original question is, are we at an inflection point? We're at an inflection point in the sense that we always have to fight for our democracy.
That's not an inflection point. That's not an inflection point. Because you could have said yes and gone into, and you could have made this very simple. But the reason why you haven't been simple is because you wanted to interject justification for the murder of Charlie Kirk. You wanted to imply that the core of the problem is Orange Man bad. You're trying to protect your ideology and your political party. Because the answer is yes, we are at an inflection point. Obviously, innocent civilians have been killed for voicing their opinion. They're speaking. The First Amendment has had its ultimate challenge now. That is an inflection point. That's not the norm. That isn't something that we see commonly done in any nation, especially in America. We are at an inflection point, but it's not because of the reasons you're trying to offer. It's not because of the politics you're trying to support and defend. It's because of what I just said. It isn't hard to say, but it is difficult, and it does take a lot of time when you're trying to inject your political ideology and defend it. Then it's difficult. Be honest, Barack Obama. That's all you have to do. Just be honest.
And we have to fight for those values that have made this country the envy of the world.
But you don't believe in those values. You wanted to transform America. The same thing that later on with AOC and with many of the progressive caucus in Congress, they want to destroy the Constitution. You don't have to believe me, folks. Ask anyone in the Democratic Socialists of America. One of their core values is to destroy the Constitution and replace it, probably with the UN human rights, but they want to destroy the Constitution. Ask members of BLM, including Patricia Kahlur, who is a self-admitted communist who created BLM to introduce communism to black people. You can ask Van Jones, who is a self-avowed communist, who was part of the Obama administration. You can talk to these people, and they will all tell you that they want to destroy the Constitution and the amendments and replace them. This is your administration, Barack Obama. Be honest with people.
And I often say democracy is not self-executing. It depends on us as citizens.
But you haven't been trying to maintain democracy. Again, I've been laying out the case of that throughout this entire video. You have not been, and nor is your party trying to instill democracy. It feels like that you guys have been moving more and more towards the left, towards a socialist government, a more autocratic dictatorship. That's what it feels like. And I think you are becoming more authoritarian. We have seen that in Biden. We have seen that in some of your policies as well. You aren't open-minded, but you claim it. You like to use the straw man. We're completely open. You can say anything. We can have a discussion about anything that you like. The moment it's something you don't like, you dismiss, you throw it away, you just try to attack the character and personality of the individual you're speaking with, not the issues, just like you've done with Charlie Kirk in this conversation. As I have shown, you're dishonest. You're dishonest, Barack Obama.
Regardless of our political affiliations, to stand up for certain core values, because otherwise we may not have them.
You know, I agree with that last statement, but I don't believe he embodies that statement. I don't think he even tries to embody that statement. And by his actions, both as president and after, and in this conversation, in the environment we currently are in, he isn't living up to that. Those are just empty, hollow words he says to sound good and to give himself cover as he is attacking the very people that he's saying we should be talking to. Okay. I'm annoyed. But I did promise last week I was going to cover this in depth. And I think I have. I think I have answered this pretty well. We talked about the environment. We talked about what Barack Obama said specifically and the many flaws in it. And throughout what we are seeing, whether it's Barack Obama or Jimmy Kimmel or Jasmine Crockett or Keith Olbermann, we are seeing a left, at least a portion of the left, that is hyper violent, that is hyper oppressive against anyone that does not obey and comply with their wishes. And this is a generational thing. This has been taught to at least the last decade, if not 2 decades, of kids in our schools. And we are seeing the consequences of that now. We need to react to that. We need to change the conversation. We need to actually have conversations, as opposed to what Barack Obama is saying, which is bow down and obey. Don't listen to anyone else. Dismiss anyone I don't like. That's what Barack Obama said, and that's wrong. He's absolutely wrong. That isn't a positive message. He wasn't trying to be positive. He was being very political, just very eloquent about being very political. We need to take a different approach. If we want to keep our nation sacrosanct, we have to get back to the Constitution. We have to get back to American principles that built this nation. We need to have conversations. And when we see politicians do what Barack Obama has done, and what Jasmine Crockett has done, and what Keith Olbermann has done, and what Jimmy Kimmel has done, we call them out for it. And we don't reward them. Because when we do reward them, we get 8 million illegal aliens that destroy the infrastructure of many of our cities and therefore harm our citizens. We have illegal aliens that commit crimes. No, not all of them, but even if it's just 1% of that 8 million, you're talking about 80,000 crimes being committed in America that didn't need to happen. We have individuals, we have to enforce our laws because otherwise we get people like the North Carolina maniac stabbing women in a subway car, or we get psycho killers like in Utah assassinating citizens because they're having a conversation. We really need to look at this honestly. Stop with the politics. Stop with the politics, Barack Obama, Jasmine Crockett. Keith Olbermann, he's lost cause. Just throw him away. But that's what I think. What do you think?